The race for the presidency in 1990. Just a few years previously, Fine Gael had been on the verge of becoming the biggest party in Ireland. But now Garret FitzGerald was gone, and the party was tearing itself apart.
It was done, I think, to damage me, so that I would be cast in the worst possible light.
The fact is that Alan Dukes was knifed.
There was blood on the floor. It created a shock. It has repeated itself. It hasn't done the party good.
The disastrous presidential campaign showed that after the exhilaration of the 80s, the party was losing its way.
I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm hiring Twink to put on comedy sketches that go wrong because I have nothing to market.
In February 2003, the funeral of former Chief Justice Tom O'Higgins is taking place in Dublin. A candidate for the presidency in 1965, Tom O'Higgins' roots in Fine Gael stretched back to the foundation of the state. The party has changed greatly over the years. Garret FitzGerald took Fine Gael through major political highs and lows. Few could have guessed that his resignation in 1987 would throw the party into a decade-long battle to replace him.
It's not the way you smile that touch my heart.
At the age of 41, Alan Dukes became the first of FitzGerald's successors. The party went for new blood in the hope of recapturing past glories.
A very exhilarating day. But I knew I had a big challenge to meet, because it wasn't a unanimous vote, clearly.
Well, I suppose you're disappointed about losing any contest, naturally enough, once you enter it. I was a little hesitant about standing at all.
I supported Peter Barry.
'Cause baby, it's you.
He had the look and air of a Taoiseach about him. And while there were many of us ambitious young ministers, we could have bided our time, so I supported Peter Barry.
You should hear what they say about you.
It was probably a mistake for the party to go immediately from Garrett's leadership straight into a new young tiger, as it were. We then had a struggle for the heart of the party. And I think that's when the factionism set in.
Alan Dukes had perhaps the shortest honeymoon period of any Irish political leader. Almost from his appointment in March 1987, senior figures within the party refused to recognise his authority.
There was always, I suppose, a little suspicion cast on the elevation of Alan Dukes. And there was a certain group in the party that always never, came to the conclusion that this fellow was too big for his boots.
What I'm talking about is a group that were working actively against him from a relatively early stage in his leadership. Alan Dukes, I think at the time, would have been the first party leader that would have had no connection either himself or through his parentage with the War of Independence and the foundation of the state.
Former ministers would sit in positions of prominence in the parliamentary party and clearly express a disinterest in what was happening. People who would openly engage in performing the morning crossword in the newspaper.
Standing ovation for party leader Alan Dukes.
Well, the group seemed to be centred around the late John Boland and Fergus O'Brien. Jim Mitchell was involved in it from, I think, a pretty early stage. And I think John Bruton supported them for a good part of the process.
In late '87, Alan Dukes was about to give his critics the perfect grounds on which to attack him. The country was faced with an economic crisis. Dukes decided to forego the traditional role of opposition and support Charles Haughey's minority government in tackling it. It was a huge political gamble.
But I felt it would have been wrong to take them out on an issue that had to do with the overall volume of expenditure, because we still hadn't finally resolved that problem. And that was why I put the Tallaght strategy together.
It was an astonishing move. Two parties, sworn enemies, voting together in the Dáil. But although it would have major implications for Fine Gael, Dukes didn't tell his own front bench. His decision was made alone.
I kept my own counsel on it. I didn't want to bring other people into the loop because I didn't want people to feel in danger of revealing things prematurely.
Dukes and a few close aides decided to announce the new strategy in the unlikely surroundings of Tallaght Chamber of Commerce in September 1987.
I remember driving into Leinster House the day before and meeting Donald Kelly at the gate, Donald Kelly of RT, and saying, look, you know, Donald, I'm constantly asking you to, you know, cover speeches and things, but this one really does matter. Please be in the Tallaght Chamber of Commerce tomorrow at 2 o'clock.
It was only after RTE was tipped off that Alan Dukes decided to consult his front bench.
Toward the end of the meeting, I mentioned he was going to Tallaght to deliver a speech. He obviously had the speech all ready. He mentioned to us what he intended to say, and then sort of it was up sticks and out the door to deliver the speech.
He never consulted us as a front bench. And some people in the front bench, I think Jim Mitchell in particular, got up his nose that we hadn't been consulted.
Dukes left the meeting and travelled to Tallaght to deliver his political bombshell before an unsuspecting audience of small businessmen.
The speech was delivered in total silence. I think the people listening to me knew that this was something very, very different, so they listened in absolute stillness for as long as it took to deliver it, I think about 20 minutes.
I won't play the kind of political game which produces the phony economic analyses that passed for opposition in the past. I won't pretend that economic reality has changed just because I now find myself in opposition.
If you look back on 1987, it was a year when many people in Irish public life distinguished themselves. The trade unions led their members to accept modest pay rises. For Fine Gael, it was probably their finest hour.
Oppositions should not write a blank cheque for a government. And I wasn't happy, and I don't think a lot of people were happy the way it was, the way the opposition were dealing with these matters, that's all.
The divisions opening up within the party were political and personal. Duke's aloof leadership style was part of the problem. His perceived arrogance was beginning to alienate even his allies.
He didn't do enough to bring others with him. He had that absolute conviction about how right he was on many issues. In my view, he was very often correct, but that's not any good unless you bring people with you.
There was an arrogance, I think, that went with that intelligence. And I also think, reflecting back on those years, that he was a frightened man as well. I mean, you could see the leadership going from him almost from the beginning. And I think it was that fear that brought out perhaps a side to his character that alienated people.
By 1988, criticism of the leader had started to spill out into the open. The Fine Gael deputy, John Donnellan, made a remark which infuriated him. If it was raining soup, he said, Alan Dukes would be out there with a fork. Dukes' response was to call a vote to expel Donnellan from the party.
I expressed the opinion that the remarks that I made were not in good taste, and I regretted them.
He put it forward, Alan Dukes, as a test of his leadership, and even though he won the vote decisively, you know, it created a rump within the party.
I thought John Donnellan was treated disgracefully.
People who had difficulty accepting that decision for genuinely good reasons on a personal basis and on a friendship basis with Deputy Donnellan. I think that was a mistake.
I am today advising the President to dissolve Dáil Éireann and to summon the incoming Dáil.
Then came the chance for Alan Dukes to silence his critics.
They're on the run, and they know that they're on the run.
Wishing and hoping and thinking and praying, planning and dreaming each night of his charms.
You still haven't answered my question.
It is a matter that will have to be negotiated with them.
So if
But Fine Gael only picked up 4 seats in the June '89 election. Not enough to form a government, and not enough to consolidate Alan Duke's leadership.
Is hold him and kiss him and love him and show him that you care.
A number of people asked me after that election why I hadn't made more use of the whole telestrategy thing during the course of the election. To some of them, my reply was, well, where were you when I needed you back in 1987?
Charles Haughey still didn't have his majority, so when the Dáil met on the 29th of June to elect a Taoiseach, he was beaten in the vote. But instead of immediately resigning, as required by the Constitution, Haughey proposed to stay on.
I and my cabinet colleagues continue to hold office and the day-to-day business of government will be carried on uninterrupted.
After Haughey made it clear that he was not going to step down despite having failed to be elected as Taoiseach, it was then Alan Dukes' turn, and all of us watching thought, this is it, Dukes is going to put the knife in.
I agree with the proposal just now made by Deputy Haughey that we should adjourn the House until Monday afternoon.
I suspected Charlie wouldn't resign. I sat in the very front seat, turned around astonished when he didn't raise the issue.
It's like seeing your centre forward with the ball at his feet, right in front of the goal, and for some inexplicable reason, not actually kicking the damn thing in.
Now the ball was at Dick Spring's feet.
We wondered, would Dick have the bottle to put the knife in?
I do not accept that he has no other option other than to stay on as Taoiseach himself or go to the President for a dissolution. That is not the situation under our Constitution.
People thought, oh my God, he's on to something.
But I would suggest that the House should adjourn for a short period this evening.
During the next few hours, the country waited to see what would happen next.
The whole nation was tuned into radios all over the place.
I now propose...
Charlie stumbled.
I now propose to go to the President and to convey my resignation as Taoiseach to him.
He's got him, was the kind of the sense of it.
By forcing Haughey's resignation, Dick Spring had for the first time upstaged Alan Dukes as the real leader of the opposition. It wouldn't be the last.
Gareth was in quite a tizzy about it, and Dick Spring created a bit of a furore about it. And that was one of the examples of, I think, the kind of futility of some opposition activity that I have very little patience with.
With another spell in opposition looming, Dukes was desperate to get into government. He even proposed a Fianna Fáil-Fine Gael coalition. But did Charlie Haughey have his eye on an old flame?
Birds do it, bees do it, even educated fleas do it.
It's time that Mr. Haughey and Fianna Fáil began to understand the reality of the situation.
Don't like coalition governments.
And that means another party being in government with Fianna Fáil.
Fine Gael, maybe? Could you talk to them again?
No, I couldn't. People have given it to us in their wisdom. Let's go and make it work. And that's what we've got to do.
Yes, I have met him. And no, it was a short meeting. Well, I'm not going to go into any detail about these matters.
The day's comings and goings started with the PD and Fianna Fáil negotiators along with their two party leaders.
Nothing is ruled in. Nothing is ruled out.
All our talks according.
Fianna Fáil TD Joe Walsh was spotted entering the PD headquarters.
Deliver the message.
On behalf of the Taoiseach, is that right?
That's correct. A new era has started in a way.
Will the government form this afternoon, Mr. O'Malley?
I believe there will.
They believe the government will be a stable one.
Let's fall in love.
It was no longer a question of Fianna Fáil on the one side and Fine Gael and everyone else on the other side. And it meant that the future of Fine Gael, in terms of government, I think, became a great deal more uncertain.
Now the rules of the game were very different. Fianna Fáil could remain in power indefinitely by forming coalitions. Nothing was going right, it seemed, for the leader of the opposition.
There was a growing sense of unease as time went on that Charlie Haughey was essentially taking Alan Dukes for a ride. Now Dukes, who had supreme confidence in his own abilities, didn't see that. But a lot of his own colleagues felt that really he got too close to Haughey.
By April 1990, Alan Dukes, tired of the constant sniping, decided it was time to confront his critics.
Well, basically, I was going to call the bluff of people who I knew were unhappy with my being there. and challenged them to come out then with a quick vote. And I thought that would be a kind of a pistols at dawn type of thing, and I would have won it.
Dukes was persuaded by his allies not to put his leadership to a vote. Now, at the 1990 Ardèche, he was about to make an announcement that would seal his fate as leader of Fine Gael.
We will contest the presidential election with a candidate of vigour, stature and substance.
Because he didn't specify, the audience thought that he meant Garret FitzGerald. Garret, I think, was up on the podium and they all started cheering, and Garret was kind of like, oh my God, oh no, no. Dukes sort of acknowledged that, oh my God, you know, what have I done? I know I can't deliver Garret.
Once Alan Dukes said that at the Ardèche, that he was going to have a Fine Gael candidate of substance, there was no option then but to have a candidate.
We had to have a candidate. For the sake of the party's morale, I think it would have been very difficult for the party to support a candidate from somewhere else.
But Dukes knew at that stage that FitzGerald wasn't interested in the presidency. He also knew that having committed the party to taking part, failure to find a candidate would finish his leadership.
There are very, very few people who want to be President of Ireland, who are either competent to be President of Ireland or who could conceivably be elected. And this became pretty apparent in the first half of 1990. Fine Gael pursued people who didn't want to be candidates.
Although his relationship with Jim Mitchell had collapsed, Alan Dukes made him Director of Elections. Mitchell was told to pursue Peter Barry.
I went over to Scull for this dinner with Jim and Patsy, and they were lined up around the table, maybe I think 10 or 12 people of, I won't name them now, but they were influential people in the affairs of the world, shall we say. And the whole dinner was trying to persuade me to stand for the presidency. And just being stubborn, I dug my heels in further.
The trawl for candidates was absolutely hilarious. All sorts of people, from the late John B. Keane to Tom O'Donnell. And when people heard that Tom O'Donnell had been approached, they were absolutely aghast, because Tom O'Donnell was to the right of the right wing within Fine Gael. Jim Mitchell himself was canvassed by Alan Dukes to run.
With the autumn approaching, Dukes was getting desperate. He approached Austin Curry, a Northern Irish politician who'd first been elected for Fine Gael the year before.
I was opposed to the idea. I didn't particularly want to be president. I thought I was too young to be president as well.
Dukes bombarded Curry with calls, even tracking him down on holidays in Yugoslavia. He buried the results of a private poll which showed Curry was unelectable. Austin Curry, however, had other reasons for not wanting to run.
There were people, I suspect, who were hoping that the campaign would be disastrous in order to further their campaign of getting rid of Dukes.
Curry asked the anti-Dukes wing for assurances that they'd row in behind him if he accepted the nomination. They said yes, and with few excuses left, Curry gave in.
It is a tremendous honour and a tremendous responsibility.
My immediate reaction to the announcement that Austin Curry was going to run for Fine Gael was to ring up Paddy Powers, the bookies, and ask what odds they were offering on Mary Robinson, and they offered 10 to 1. And I put down £100 there and then.
You're just too good to be true. Can't take my eyes off you.
By the time Austin Curry's campaign was launched in September 1990, the other candidates, Labour's Mary Robinson and Fianna Fáil's Brian Lenihan, had been in the race for months.
And I thank God I'm alive.
For Fine Gael and their reluctant candidate, a 2-month nightmare was just beginning.
Can't take my eyes off you.
It was a campaign that we had good reason to believe we could probably never win. And in truth, in retrospect, it was so horrendous. It was like having a tooth extracted over 2 months. And the detail of it, I'm pleased to say, I've blocked from my memory.
As Austin Curry embarked on a tour of the country, it quickly became clear that Alan Dukes' enemies were reneging on their promises of support.
love you, baby, and if it's quite alright, I need you.
Members of the parliamentary party were actively colluding through the presidential campaign to get rid of Alan Dukes.
Trust in me when I say.
People who weren't expected to be there to receive one and to assist in the campaign found excuses for not being there.
There was little or no activity in certain constituencies around the country, and the worst possible result is what those people wanted.
Fine Gael party supporters are in a state of disbelief that the opinion poll showed him at only 14%. So is it all?
Curry kept going, putting a brave face on poll after poll, which put him a poor third behind Robinson and Lenihan. At party headquarters, Jim Mitchell, the director of elections, and Alan Dukes were frequently at each other's throats.
There was one occasion I was called into party headquarters. The leader and the director of elections were exchanging verbals that indicated to me that there was a problem.
This guy was a reluctant candidate. The party was sort of reluctantly put him in. The leader was in trouble. You know, nobody knew really what they were about.
I'm proud of it. My party.
As polling day approached, rumours about Alan Duke's leadership were reaching fever pitch.
In the final days of the campaign itself, I remember speaking to one member of the front bench who obviously I don't think quite knew my loyalties and made a statement to the fact that something would have to be done with regard to Dukes.
On election count day, as the ballot boxes were being opened around the country, the result for Austin Curry was every bit as bad as had been expected.
Austin Curry, 12.3%, confirming a difficult constituency for Fine Gael.
Their vote has slumped in the Sligo-Leitrim area by some.
It was a disastrous vote for Austin Curry.
And Austin Curry, 10.1%.
No, I don't think we chose the wrong candidate. Austin Curry, who was in every respect an excellent candidate.
Alan Dukes' leadership must now be in some doubt.
Your head on the block. Almost certainly an attempt by some people to persuade Alan Dukes to stand down.
The missing factor is who's going to do anything about it.
I called Tom Enright from my office in Dáil here. I just said I was putting a motion down of no confidence and could he include it on the agenda.
I didn't expect it to come until early the following week. I had been on my way from Leinster House to the county centre in Ballsbridge to be there when the announcement was made. When I was told that a motion of no confidence had been put down, I judged that the best thing for me to do was to go straight back to Leinster House.
Meanwhile, across Dublin at the RDS, Mary Robinson and Brian Lenihan were getting ready for the final announcement. But there was no sign of Austin Curry. His director of elections had told him not to be there.
I watched the television that showed Brian Lenihan arriving. I still would have headed immediately for the RDS. But I rang Jim Mitchell and was told no, it wasn't necessary.
And I was appalled looking at the announcement on television.
Mrs. Mary Robinson has been duly elected as President of Ireland.
Not only was Austin Curry not there, he had been advised not to be there.
I know I was very, very angry about it. I did think Jim probably should have gone up on the stage, but he didn't.
The fact that I wasn't there looked bad.
Our first ever woman president.
Suggested I was a bad loser.
It was done, I think, to damage me, to make sure that the result was as bad as it possibly could be, so that I would be cast in the worst possible light.
I also extend my sympathy to Austin Curry and the others.
It was a bad decision and clearly motivated by a different agenda to get rid of Alan Dukes as leader.
Austin Curry too fought a noble campaign and I wish him...
As the party stood humiliated at the RDS, news of the motion of no confidence in Dukes was flying around Leinster House.
I will never forgive the person who put the motion in. Just at that time, I mean, 6 o'clock, later in the evening. I thought that was a very, very disloyal thing for any member of Fine Gael to do.
I felt it was the opportune time and I put the motion down and that was it. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, the end of the conversation on all of this.
To Austin
and Anita Curry. In an election like this, there can only be one winner.
With the vote on his leadership tabled for the following week, Alan Duke spent the weekend at party headquarters with a couple of loyal aides.
It was a barrel of laughs. It was a difficult time.
Well, it was lonely and it was intense, and it was a long weekend, late into both nights, of making phone calls to contacts and constituencies.
I remember talking to Alan. He rang me at my constituency clinic on a Saturday morning, and I said to him that if he didn't have the support of the front bench, that there was really no point in coming before the parliamentary party. I suppose I didn't bite the bullet. I opted out and I left it to others.
We need to build up our party's strength and support, and I don't honestly believe that Alan is just able to do that any longer.
The day before the vote, with his opponents moving in for the kill, Alan Dukes came to a decision.
So I felt that a victory might indeed have been a victory in the short term, but that the problem wouldn't have gone away. So I felt the best thing for the party was for me to step down. Although I thought then, what else would I say, of course, that they had made a wrong decision.
Mr. Dukes, can I ask
Charlie,
you,
how are you?
why did you decide to resign in the end?
That's for another moment, Charlie, not now.
And are you very disappointed the way you were treated by your party?
That's for another day, Charlie. I'll talk about that
Okay,
another
thank you.
time.
Is it going to be damaging for Fine Gael?
There was blood on the floor. It was the first time it happened in Fine Gael. It created a shock. It has repeated itself. It hasn't done the party good.
Are you prepared to serve as the leader of Fine Gael?
Well, that is something that I will make my position known about probably tomorrow. But as I said, I don't believe that we should speak of that tonight.
It's all over now. Baby blue. It's all over now.
Less than a week after Alan Duke's resignation, John Bruton was elected as the leader of a very bruised and bitterly divided Fine Gael.
Can you heal the divisions within the party?
I think today's meeting has healed divisions already. It was the most united meeting, the most enthusiastic meeting, and a meeting which brought us all together in a tremendous way.
John's an ideas man. His capacity to bring fresh thinking to old problems was astounding for somebody who'd been around the block for, the guts of 30 years or more.
John Bruton had first been elected to the Dáil at 22, becoming finance minister in Garret Fitzgerald's first government. His prosperous farming background sometimes gave the impression that he was slightly out of touch.
One thing that everybody who worked for him always remembers, if he was coming into a room where the door was shut, he would always knock loudly before entering. But and he always ate his food incredibly quickly, which I think is probably another boarding school trait. And certainly if you were to compare John with Richard, his younger brother, who didn't go to boarding school at an early stage, there's a remarkable difference in temperament between the two of them.
Almost from the beginning, John Bruton had a fraught relationship with the press.
The media had always been dismissive of John Bruton. He had never recovered, in my view, from the 1982 tax on children's shoes budget. He was always seen as, very clever, but generally a bumbling, volatile individual who didn't have the sort of the soft touch necessary for schmoozing with the media.
The man credited with marketing Mary Robinson was brought in by Bruton to smooth press relations.
In 1990, when I became media advisor to Fine Gael, I thought that I would find a party which realised that they would have to re-examine the Fitzgerald legacy, they'd have to move beyond the Liberal agenda, that they were going to lose it very soon. Fianna Fáil had taken back the entire Liberal agenda from Fine Gael, and you were left with this empty shell of politically correct, posturing people, repeating Garret Fitzgerald's shibboleths as if Ireland was still struggling for divorce and contraception, all these things, when all these battles were now long over.
Harris decided that radical steps were needed to overhaul the party's image. On a Saturday afternoon in May 1991, the new look Fine Gael was unveiled.
Over the next 90 minutes or so, I'll be joined by colleagues from the front benches, the back benches, and no benches at all.
But even senior figures within the party had no idea what was about to be unleashed in their name.
Bruton, now don't go. Rose, Bailas, where the hell is that old one she has me hat for? Mr. Bruton, don't go, listen.
Twink was out on stage as a typical dub, cleaning woman. Brush and curlers and scarf. Sean Barrett, I can recall, being over one side and she was having a go at Sean.
Merciful Redeemer! What are you doing here after?
What are you doing on here?
You're not that scared to shut the life out of me.
Mr. Barrett this and
Mr. Barnett, isn't it?
Mr. Barrett that.
Mr. Barnett, when I walked in this door this morning.
Harris was behind the stage, bubbling with enthusiasm.
Oh, wait.
An incident in the Dáil bar involving Deputy Ned O'Keefe and RTE's Una Claffey would be the focus of Twink's sketch.
I was there in the Dáil bar the day that animal, that pit bull terrier, the day that man dropped the love to Una Augustaguna.
I thought it was absolutely horrendous, but that wasn't a very particular judgment because almost everybody in Ireland and everybody in the hall and every journalist thought it was absolutely horrendous.
Well, he come at me with this thing. Well, it was 18 inches long. If it was
And that was embarrassing. Oh, that was really embarrassing. I mean, I wish the ground would open up and swallow me.
What's gilded, says I? Says he barely go and ask Austin DC. He knows all about that farmer silage stock and everything.
To allow Owen to organise that kind of a circus at a Fine Gael Ardèche was... I knew nothing about it. He came on the screen.
The sketch is quite funny on paper. It wasn't funny on transmission.
I told you, Dave, that
on paper, it takes 3 minutes to deliver. It actually took 10.5 minutes to deliver. I won't go into why it took 10.5 minutes to deliver, but it was ad-libbed out. And when you ad-lib things, things go wrong.
Within about 0.8 of a second, it was absolutely apparent that disaster had struck. And the right response in those circumstances was to make a very full apology, absolutely instantly.
What was really significant was Fine Gael's reaction to the sketch. Because at the end of the day, it was a comedy sketch that went wrong. It wasn't worth the song and dance that went on. They went mad. It showed me how politically correct the party had become. And it also showed me, like, how kind of desperate I had become. And I suddenly realised I'm doing that because the party stands for nothing. I'm scraping the bottom of the barrel. I'm hiring Twink to put on comedy sketches that go wrong. Because I have nothing to market. I have no substance left. Yeah? And I left.
In November 1992, John Bruton was facing into a general election. The signs weren't good. In his 2 years as leader, he had been unable to stop his party's slide in the polls.
John didn't gel with a segment of the electorate, and it wasn't simply that they weren't willing to support him, they clearly disliked him very substantially.
The ordinary person in the street didn't have any affection for the man. They had it for Garrett. They didn't have it for Alan Dukes, and they didn't have it for John Bruton.
Senior figures in the party, however, believed that Fine Gael's problems went much deeper than the leadership.
I said to the parliamentary party, that the human quality that people actually vote for is courage. So on almost every issue, the Fine Gael policy had been to try and find a middle road. It was absolutely fatal. And so I told them that while I respected many of them individually, that collectively I thought they were unsellable.
John Bruton knew that his only hope of taking his party into government was by forming an election pact with Labour. He floated the idea of a rainbow coalition.
Without the involvement of Fine Gael at the very centre of the next government, there will be no change of government.
But Bruton made the coalition proposal without consulting a furious Dick Spring, who still harboured a grudge from their time together in government in the 1980s.
When
John Bruton unilaterally announced that he was going to lead a rainbow coalition from a position, it would appear, on the ground of electoral weakness. It was seen as the touch of the old arrogance coming back again.
By John Bruton, leader.
The result for Fine Gael was a major blow. They dropped 9 seats to 45, their lowest level since 1948. And Labour were the winners, with 33 seats in a stronger bargaining position than ever before.
I can remember meeting in the company of a senior political correspondent, some Fine Gael people in Buswell's Hotel, about 5 days after the election. And the senior political correspondent challenged them to name the 9 Fine Gael people who had lost their seats. They couldn't do it. And in fact, one of them said, "We didn't lose 9, did we?" So they were almost sort of in denial about the outcome of the election.
Despite the result, Fine Gael were still confident that they could lead a coalition government. A few days after the election, Bruton and Spring met to see if they could work together. The venue was the Constitution Room of the Shelburne Hotel in Dublin.
I can't remember really how much I expected of that meeting. I think there would have been a bit of a residue of the view that Fine Gael would have had in the past, that, well, it was just a question of sorting it out with the Labour Party and off we go.
It was just Dick Spring and me on the one side, and John Bruton and Peter White on the other, and about 4,000 journalists, camera crews and the whole lot. And Peter White and I stood guard on the door.
With the demoralised party behind him, John Bruton, more than Dick Spring, needed the coalition deal. But would Spring sign up?
Well, he was coy, I suppose would be the right word. He was reticent about it. He wasn't prepared to commit himself. He obviously wanted to keep his cards close to his chest and play the game from his point of view to the best effect for the Labour Party.
There were several occasions when Peter and I had to look into the room. Throughout the meeting, Dick Spring stood and John Bruton sat at a table. The reason Dick Spring was standing was because at the end of a long campaign like that, his back would be in a quite bad way. But of course the impression that was created by that was that he was hectoring and bullying and that John was kind of taking it on the chin.
The meeting did help me to see, in a way maybe I hadn't seen before, the extent of the, I suppose, hurt, I suppose would be the word, that Dick Spring had felt arising out of some of the conflicts that we would have had in the 82 to 87 government about matters related to the public finances and, the balance between the public and the private sector.
But both men had a bottom line. Labour would not share power with the PDs. Fine Gael wouldn't work with the Democratic left. Leaving the meeting, Bruton knew that a coalition deal was now very unlikely.
John Bruton looked as if he'd been beaten up when he came out of that meeting. He looked completely shattered, as if things had gone very badly wrong.
You said this morning going in you were very optimistic about this meeting, but you seem more downbeat now than you were then. Has it not gone as well as you hoped?
No, it was a very serious meeting and we had a lot of things to discuss.
As we drove away from the meeting, I noticed that Dick Spring's hands were shaking. And I said, "It was tough then, was it?" And he said, "Yes, it was very tough."
He had settled some old scores and he had informed John Bruton that Fine Gael had lost the election, that the winners were the Labour Party, and that he had to come to terms with that.
There was worse to come for John Bruton. Haughey's successor, Albert Reynolds, offered Labour exactly what they wanted. Spring swallowed hard and went into government with Fianna Fáil.
I think in the Fine Gael mind, it changed the political landscape forever. They felt so betrayed, completely devastated by that decision. They felt that we had done the unthinkable, that we had shaken hands with the devil, and it just became a kind of almost something that they could never forgive.
Deputy Spring himself toured the country asking voters for a mandate for change. Real change, he called it. Now he wants to use that mandate to put back in office the same Taoiseach, the same ministers and the same party against whom he has campaigned with such self-conscious rhetoric here in this House and elsewhere.
I don't intend to
to make or to reply to the pathetic and cheap remarks made by Deputy Bruton.
Now 5 years out of office, Fine Gael seemed destined to remain in the wilderness. The self-confidence of earlier years had ebbed away.
When I joined the party in the early 80s, it was absolutely clear to me what the issues were which made Fine Gael different. We were out there tomorrow leading people forwards. By 1992, and I was the press officer, it wasn't clear to me what new ground they were trying to break. Now, if I, as press officer, didn't know that, I sure as hell couldn't communicate it to anybody else. I thought it was time to go.
Less than 3 years after Alan Dukes had been ousted, John Bruton's leadership was coming under attack.
I think from 92 onwards, John himself changed. I think he became somewhat paranoid about his leadership position. Really, some of the lessons that we needed to learn, some of the changes we needed to make as a consequence of the 92 election weren't happening.
Fine Gael, the last MRBI poll gave them a core vote of 13%, the lowest in the history of the party, and the last...
John Bruton had reason to be paranoid.
There was, virtually mutiny in the party. There was rebellion in the ranks.
4 members of the front bench, Charlie Flanagan, Alan Shatter, Jim O'Keefe and Jim Higgins, held secret talks about removing Bruton.
When we met, the 4 of us didn't see things improving, and we decided that we would, I suppose, take the ultimate course and suggest to John Bruton that he might step aside as leader.
But the Fine Gael leader found out about the meeting. When the 4 plotters trooped into the leader's office to demand his resignation, Bruton was ready.
I got wind of the word that they were going to come up, so I decided to make myself unavailable for a while. And then I got a few of my own friends to come into the meeting, so that when the 4 musketeers trooped in to see me, I had a good number of people with me who were well able to exercise their lungs too.
John obviously defended his position, ably assisted, as always, by Nora.
The discussion didn't quite go that maybe the way that the 4 gents thought it was going to go.
At the end of the meeting, Jim O'Keefe, rather belatedly, offered his and our resignation from the front bench.
I can't remember what I said to them, really. Did I say something memorable?
John Bruton responded, "There's no need, Jim. You're all fired anyway."
As he has not accepted our advice, we have tendered our resignation as members of his front bench.
The would-be coup descended into a shambles, but the front bench rebels pushed the issue to a vote of no confidence. John Bruton faced his party, confident of victory.
John fought a very tenacious battle, and when it came to the vote, was ultimately saved by some of those who, in the 6 months prior to the 94 heave, were most vigorous in lobbying behind the scenes to get rid of them.
That evening, as John Bruton walked out to announce his success, a little-known TD was at his side. He, more than anyone else, had played a crucial role in shoring up support for the Fine Gael leader.
Well, I'm pleased to advise you, on behalf of the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party, that the members of the Fine Gael Parliamentary Party have reaffirmed their confidence in John Bruton's continued leadership.
John Bruton, can I ask you for your reaction?
Michael Lowry is a tremendous hustler, be it at a sort of an interpersonal level or in terms of raising money. By the summer of 1994, the party was in a very, very poor financial situation where it reached a stage where people getting salary checks were told not to cash them for a couple of days, and taxi firms were threatening to pull out their accounts and so on.
We had a situation where, had we been a private company, we certainly would have been put into liquidation. We were unable to pay our debts. And I would say that Fine Gael suffered badly because they never attempted to match the professionalism of Fianna Fáil in raising funds.
As the new chairman of the Fine Gael trustees, Lowry turned his attention to clearing the party's £1.4 million debt. But his rapid elevation within Fine Gael was regarded with suspicion.
I personally became disturbed as to what seemed to be the extent of the influence that Michael Lowry was exercising within the parliamentary party over John Bruton. He'd become chairman of the parliamentary party, but he's someone who'd made no impact in the Dáil since his election. He was someone who I couldn't recall having even delivered a speech in the Dáil chamber coherently on any issue.
But in November 1994, Michael Lowry was about to emerge onto the national stage. The Reynolds Spring Coalition was collapsing in the most dramatic fashion over the appointment of Attorney General Harry Wheelahan to the High Court.
All of my Labour colleagues in Cabinet and all of the junior ministers who are members of the Labour Party will resign from their offices before this vote is taken. I believe the House is entitled to nothing less from us.
John Bruton, battling for his political life just months earlier, now found himself within sight of power.
The big challenge for John Bruton was to try and mend his fences with Dick Spring, and he went out and had a secret meeting with Dick Spring in Dermot Gleeson's house in Ballsbridge.
Well, it was a much more engaged and engaging and friendly and meeting, and we were obviously able, the personal chemistry at the meeting was very, very good.
But there was a major stumbling block. Dick Spring wanted to share the job of Taoiseach, unless John Bruton conceded the holy grail of finance to the Labour Party. Michael Lowry helped broker the deal.
It came to the decision. It is absolutely not worthwhile putting at risk the possibility of forming a government by insisting that we have the Department of Finance.
John Bruton be Taoiseach tomorrow?
At the moment, that seems like the intention, yes.
The following day, John Bruton was due to be nominated as Taoiseach. But even as he waited in the Dáil chamber, Bruton was still short of the majority he needed.
Democratic left made it quite clear that under no circumstances would they be part of that government unless they had two sitting at the cabinet table. We came up with a solution, and the solution was that Pat Rabbitte would be appointed as a non-voting member of the cabinet.
The Parliamentary Labour Party will be supporting the nomination of Deputy John Bruton for Taoiseach here today.
So during the course of the debate for the nomination of John Bruton as Taoiseach, I approached in the chamber Francis de Rossa. I told him what we were proposing, and he accepted it, and at that time I knew that we could form the government, and we proceeded to form that government.
Count Porter, I wish to thank this House and my colleagues for electing me Taoiseach. It's a high office, but a humbling one.
To the back, thank you.
How does it feel to be called Taoiseach?
It's a bit of a shock.
John Bruton and his party, starved of power for so long, were determined to keep their coalition partners happy.
I think he realised that he had been a very, very difficult person to deal with, unnecessarily difficult. And he did become a much more rounded person.
The Rainbow Coalition proved remarkably stable. And as the economy began to boom, Fine Gael rediscovered the forgotten joys of success.
The yes vote has carried this referendum. William Binchy, what is your view? Do you concede?
Well, yes, John, the yeses have...
And in November 1995, John Bruton's government succeeded where Garret FitzGerald's had failed. With his Conservative credentials, Bruton played a crucial role in securing a yes vote in the divorce referendum. One policy area, however, would prove to be more contentious.
Upside down to the left.
In the mid-90s, the peace process was still in its infancy. From the beginning, Bruton's warm relations with unionists reflected his natural distrust of Republicans. When Sinn Féin came to Dublin, there were no warm handshakes from the Taoiseach. Bruton's handling of Northern Ireland drew criticism.
While he was leader, the IRA ceasefire broke down, and the peace process was reactivated under Fianna Fáil. I'm not saying Fianna Fáil are terrific, great moral human beings, geniuses and so on. It's just on that issue they had a proper feel for it, and John Bruton didn't.
People tend now to forget it was John Bruton who, with John Major, launched the joint framework documents in Belfast in February of '95. And they were the documents that formed the basis for what became the Good Friday Agreement.
But Northern Ireland was far from the minds of party backbenchers. There was simmering resentment at John Bruton's exclusion of those who had tried to bring him down in 1994.
I think he had a very clear sense of revenge at that particular point, and the only person who was identified as a national figure who had attempted to remove John, who was appointed to that government, was Michael Noonan.
Bruton's allies had all been rewarded, chief amongst them Michael Lowry, now Minister for Transport, Energy and Communications.
The main thrust of his going about his political business was that these Fianna Fáil fellas are corrupt. I'm hell-bent on cleaning up these cosy cartels, like Jesus in the temple, kicking over the tables almost.
Publicly, he was the person who was going to root out vested interests. But privately, Michael Lowry was seriously compromised.
Well, I remember receiving an envelope in a car park, where people always believe they have to deliver secret documents to journalists in car parks. And it was quite astonishing. I pulled them out lovingly and looked at them. There was correspondence from the architect who had been retained to do the extension of Lowry's house.
The documents proved that the wealthy businessman Ben Dunn, the main customer of Lowry's refrigeration company, had paid for an elaborate extension to the minister's home.
And this proved, beyond any shadow of a doubt, that he was in fact a kept man.
On Thursday, the 28th of November 1996, Sam Smith called Lowry's press office with the allegations.
I was in Brussels chairing a Council of Ministers meeting, and I got a note to say that a number of questions had been put to my press office by independent newspapers in respect of my house at Holy Cross. I then later in the afternoon got a phone call from a member of my family to say that there was a helicopter hovering over the house that had been there for ages, that there had been a lot of photographers and a lot of press people about.
I think I went off somewhere late that night and got a copy of the Irish Independent on my way home. And I remember reading it and I was thinking, this is very big. I woke up next morning very early and I read it again, and then I said, this is enormous.
The story alleged that Michael Lowry, one of Fine Gael's most senior figures and the party's main fundraiser, had been evading tax.
This issue has nothing to do with my ministerial responsibilities. This issue predates my appointment to Cabinet and to government.
By the following day, the time for explanations had passed. Bruton summoned Lowry to government buildings.
I went through my business relationship with Dunn Stores, in particular with Ben Dunn at that particular time.
I didn't like it at all. Unfortunately, I decided whether I had to or not. I decided in two other cases as well to ask for people's resignations. It's very hard.
I did resign, and I suppose it was the most difficult day of my life. It was a very traumatic experience for John Bruton in particular, and for the Fine Gael party. It's something that I very much regret. It's something that will always live with me. I'll propose with my best friend forever. Okay?
Lowry resigned from the party, but that night no one in Fine Gael could have appreciated the fallout of his involvement with them. In the years to come, tribunals would reveal the fundraising secrets of Fine Gael. Their reputation for honesty would be seriously damaged. And once more, the party would turn on its leader.
One particular guy, but there were lots more like him, but this is just crystallizes. He said, he came to me and he says, how do we get rid of this fella Bruton? He says, how do we get rid of him?